Hello and welcome to Capital News International. We are live here from New York. I'm in New York, Enrico Wilfred here. And with me from Georgetown, Guyana is Nigel Hughes. Nigel is joining us basically on the road, so to speak, because it's been a long day in Georgetown. It's been a day where we have been hearing a lot of things coming out of Guyana and issues that are controversial and contentious. I had a brother who used to say that Guyana can be described as a country with a little bit of rain, a little bit of sun, and plenty laugh. But there's nothing really to laugh about with regard to what happened today. What happened today was an attorney at law was detained by the Special Organized Crime Unit of the Guyana Police Force. And it has created quite a storm within the country's legal fraternity. Nigel Hughes, welcome to Capital News International.
Thank you very much, Enrico. Good to see you back where you perform best. Please forgive the fact that I'm sitting in my car because I had to pull over while I was driving to speak with you. So privileged to be with you, and thank you.
Give us an idea of what really happened this morning with the Attorney Clark.
Enrico, with your permission, I think the full context started on Tuesday. I don't know if you prefer me to start there or you just want today.
No, you can start on Tuesday because, as you said, the context started there.
Right. So Ms. Clark is an attorney at law who has been practicing in Guyana for the last 7 years, 4 of which she was a prosecutor with the Director of Public Prosecutions. On Tuesday, she accompanied a client of hers to SOCO's headquarters. He was the target of an investigation. They requested of him a statement, and the attorney had advised him before he got there and while he was at SOCO in the presence of several SOCO officers that her advice was that he should remain silent and not provide any statement to SOCO on the investigation, particularly since he was arrested and taken into custody. There were warrants to search his premises. When she said that, she was informed by the SOCO officer present that statement amounted to obstruction of justice. The client was asked to come back on Thursday, and she told the SOCO officer, that when they return on Thursday, the client's position will remain unchanged, i.e., he will not provide a statement. He's exercising his constitutional right to silence. They then informed her that they will arrest her if he maintained the same position when he came on Thursday. So they said to her in no uncertain terms, if you come back here on Thursday with your client and your client's position has not changed and your advice to your client has not changed, we will arrest you for obstruction of justice. She returned on Thursday. The officer who was in charge apparently was unavailable and was asked to return today. She returned this morning at 10. The officers asked, first of all, the officers had a prepared statement which they were asking her client to sign. When she turned up, she said her advice remains unchanged to the client, that he's going to maintain his silence, he's not signing any statement, and they promptly arrested her for attempting to pervert the course of justice. She was detained, her phone was removed from her, she was arrested by a male officer, her phone was taken away from her. They then called a female officer upstairs who wanted her ring and the other things they take away from people when they're in custody. I got a call maybe about 10:30 or thereabouts from one of her colleagues indicating that she had been arrested for advising her client to remain silent. I arrived at the SOCO headquarters. When I got there, there was an attorney outside who was waiting for 20 minutes to see Ms. Clark, and they refused to let him in. One of the senior officers came out. He invited me in. I went in accompanied by a few other lawyers from my office. We went inside. I inquired whether she was in custody. This was confirmed by the SOCO officer present. I inquired for what offense. He said he had to get instructions. He went out of the room, came back in and said that she was in custody for attempting to pervert the course of justice. I said, can you provide me with the particulars of this attempt by her to pervert the course of justice? He said he was unable to do so. Present at the time was Mr. Sean Alicock, whose chambers Ms. Clark is a member of. He got on the phone. He made a call. I believe it might have been to the Attorney General. The officer who I was speaking to couldn't give me the particulars. He said he had to check with his superior officer. In the meantime, I contacted several members of the press and indicated to them what had happened and that we would be hosting a press conference within an hour. A call, I believe, was made perhaps by the Attorney General. I'm not sure, but so I'm advised. And within maybe 10, 15 minutes of mine being there, the officer came back in the room. I said, sir, can you provide me with the particulars of how Ms. Clark attempted to pervert the course of justice? He said, well, I can't give you that now. And then he said that she is free to go. I said, but I still need from you the particulars because everything you say here, I want to be accurate and for you to confirm what it is you're saying because this is going to attract legal proceedings. He said, sir, all I'm instructed to tell you is that she was arrested for attempting to pervert the course of justice and she's free to go. We left Soko, was a brief press conference outside with one of your colleagues, Gordon Mosley, and then at about 11:45, we held a press conference where Ms. Clark herself explained what had happened to her.
But Mr. Hughes, why does this continue to happen in Guyana where the police make the assumption or arrogate to themselves that every single person must give a statement? They can't remain silent. They have to say what happened or tell the police what has happened. And now it has gone to the level of an attorney.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, on Tuesday, this was quite hilarious if it wasn't so sad. They said to her, when she said to them in no uncertain terms, my advice is not going to change when we come back on Thursday, they said to her, counsel, you will need counsel. So this is even more perverse. They told her in advance, if your client does not change his position, and if you don't change your advice to your client, you will be arrested. So it wasn't even an on-the-spot decision. This was clearly the intention of Soko. I can only assume acting on advice from their legal advisors or someone, that you can arrest an attorney for advising a client to remain silent, where the Constitution gives you the right to silence, but more importantly, the judge's rules require that the police inform you before they take a statement that you're a suspect and you have the right to silence. So this man was informed since the Friday before that he was a suspect, which meant that he was entitled to the right to silence. And the officers clearly indicated to his lawyer, you, the lawyer, will be arrested for telling your client to follow the judge's rules and to exercise your constitutional right.
Surely this can't be a political thing. The Attorney General got involved. Sean Alicock, for full disclosure, is the husband of a minister of the current government. Emily Dotson is part of that law firm of Alicock and Dotson. And they have also done work for the current administration. Why is it that the police believe that they can arrogate onto themselves powers that they do not have?
Well, I'm not sure. I assume that they must be getting advice from some source or some quarter that says to them that they can exercise these powers that they don't have. I suspect what happened and what probably led to her release was the fact that we threatened. I actually contacted you. We in the presence of Soko indicated that we were going to go international with this, and also inform the embassies that are from countries that are friendly with Guyana. I don't think this was a case where this release was because they felt that it was unlawful. This release came because of, I believe, the threat of publication globally. But to get back to your specific question about why they arrogate this power onto them, it could only be because they are facilitated by those powers that, or those persons that either are responsible for their employment or are responsible for law enforcement. It can't come from anywhere else. And until the judiciary actually says in no uncertain terms that this is completely unacceptable, it will continue to happen.
So what will happen from here going on? What action the attorney wants to take? Do you know?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. She will be taking legal proceedings. The pre-trial protocol letter will go off by email tomorrow, and I anticipate by either close of business Monday or Tuesday, there will be legal proceedings filed against the state, against the officer that ordered her arrest. He'll be sued personally, and for the several infringements of her protected constitutional rights. That's the only course that I'm aware of and that I'm retained to address. I've seen the statements by the Bar Association. I've seen the statements by the Guyana Association of Women Lawyers. I know that this has been carried in the Caribbean, and there have been various statements in the Caribbean. But this could only be settled by judicial decision.
Mr. Hughes, sorry, I normally call you Nigel. But my mother used to say when you call people Mr. Hughes, then, you know, you're really upset. So,
well, I hope not with me.
But with the society, we are now an oil-producing country. We are an emerging power with regard to economics. Once we manage our resources correctly, we have Bloomberg Television visiting. Well, we had. At the moment, I know Al Jazeera, the English section of Al Jazeera, is visiting and doing news reports on the oil sector. We are not embarrassed by all of this?
You know, Enrico, I hate to say this, but I believe that this is what the history shows. You have to have a certain level of decency, first of all, to be capable of being embarrassed. So you either have to have a particular set of standards, or you have to have some reference point against which conduct is judged, and you can become embarrassed as a result of that conduct. I think Guyana has long abandoned any sort of generally accepted international standards on rule of law. I think several lawyers will tell you of both political persuasions, of the manner in which they are treated when they go to the police station. I can say to you that certainly every time I go to CID headquarters, and this started with the Henry Boyce issue, there are no less than 4 to 5 cameras that are not dedicated to the suspects, but are just dedicated to videotaping me as I speak to my clients in CID headquarters and while I am standing in CID headquarters. So imagine I go in with a client and the crime chief gives instructions. There are 4 persons who then come downstairs with cameras focused on me, and they spend the entire time video recording me as if I am the suspect when I'm there to accompany a client who is being investigated. So, and that's just my experience. I know of several lawyers who have complained about various abuses that take place whenever they go to the police station. And I suppose if you really think about the consequence of this, this happened at SOCO headquarters in Camp Street, down the road from police headquarters. What happens to that little person who's up Myconi Creek or gets stopped late at night on the drill road near the Myconi Bridge, or happens to be somewhere in Liverpool quarantine, and the rule of law doesn't even exist for it to evaporate? It's just going to be a case of abuse. All those people that get stopped pulled over by traffic cops, and no question of rule of law. It's pretty scary. I mean, this is in the center of Georgetown. This is in the center of where the capital of the oil wealth, as you put it. And, they're not embarrassed by this. And it means that they clearly are not capable of being embarrassed by this. And it's obvious that their view is that this is acceptable conduct. Well, from where I sit, the only person that can tell me that this is acceptable conduct would be the judiciary. And it will have to be the judiciary who will have to come forward and say that Soko is entitled to do this or not. Forgive me, but I just want to give you an example of what happened before. Mr. Justice Singh, who is now sitting on the bench, when he was an attorney, got arrested for some silly little traffic offense, and they took him into Brickdam and they kept him in custody for 2 hours, and he was awarded $2 million, and that's probably somewhere around 10, 15 years ago. That happened. I assume if we use the appropriate levels established by that, then Ms. Clark is entitled to substantial damages, which we hope the judiciary will award.
But Nigel, even if the judiciary were to award damages, it doesn't come out of the pocket of the police officers. It doesn't come out of the pockets of the police force. We, the taxpayers in Guyana, turn around and pay for that miscreant behavior.
Yes, and you know, our sister CARICOM country, Trinidad, at one time, the approach of the state was, let the police go ahead and kill the people they call criminals. Let them abuse the rights. The state will pay. So it didn't even act as a deterrent or a restraint on their conduct there. Here, it really will be in the hands of the judiciary to demonstrate in no uncertain terms, not only by the award of damages, but in every subsequent case where a lawyer makes a report that they have either been denied access to their client, or they have been threatened with arrest, or their client's rights have been abused, that the criminal cases are thrown out and that the civil cases that they bring for wrongful arrest and malicious prosecution result in substantial awards of damages. One of the actions that we are actually considering taking is bringing private criminal charges against the officer who wrongfully detained Ms. Clark. And let's see if the Director of Public Prosecutions will enter and withdraw that, because it's a criminal offense to restrain somebody against their will. And we will also be considering criminal charges, and we'll see what happens and what the state institutions and apparatus do.
In this age of TikTok and cameras everywhere, and you said that the police would also videotape the attorneys who go in.
I don't know about the attorneys. I think I'm specially selected. I've not heard another attorney who has been specially selected for that attention by CID headquarters. So I can't say that I've heard anybody else. It happens every time I go, though.
Well, then you must be
as a matter of fact,
for some reason to be in the police movies.
It's reached the stage when I go there, the police officers quite often say, "Oh God, Mr. Hughes, your come is going to be stressed today." But anyway. Sorry.
Yes, go ahead. I lost you.
No, I said, sorry about that. Yeah, it was an incoming call. Please forgive me. Yeah, I was saying it's reached the stage when I go to the police headquarters, the officers say to me, "Oh God, Mr. Hughes is stressed today." I'm not sure whether you heard me.
No, I didn't hear you because the person kept calling back.
Yeah, I hope that they stopped calling. Yeah, apologies for that. No, I said it's reached a stage where every time I go to CID headquarters, the police officers, they say, "Oh God, Mr. Hughes, you come going to be stressed today." Because they know that, you know, the cameras are going to be all over the place. They focus on you. And that's just how it is.
So the question is, don't they realize that that also turns the attention to them? And cameras are almost everywhere now. And it makes for a different regime in terms of how people look at things. And this brings me to the question, Nigel, that somebody called me, didn't know I was doing this program with you, and said, why are we paying attention, well, not paying attention, why are we allowing the major story to be knocked off of the front pages, meaning the Charan Das diplomatic, if I can call it that, a snafu and cuss out in Delhi almost a year ago, that would only last 48 hours, and now we have another issue that has arisen that is knocking off the front page. There's no conspiracy here that that may have been something that somebody thought about and said, well, look,
You
let's
mean they
control the
created an
narrative here.
You mean to take the distraction away from Charan Das, they created this situation? I mean, anything is possible, but I don't think Charan Das is going to come off of the front pages. That in and of itself was absolutely amazing. The fact that we have not yet, as a country, apologized to this lady, Mrs. Ghosh. I hope that some private citizens, especially men, because I certainly would be willing to be party to that, we would like to apologize and say this does not represent the average man in Guyana. This is not the sort of conduct that we participate in, and we offer our unreserved apologies, and we strongly condemn the actions of the official representative of the country. I don't think Charan Das is not going to disappear. It was the subject of a front page comment, I think, yesterday in the Stabroek. It was the editorial today. The behavior in Charan Das is so egregious, but more egregious than that for me is the fact that I have not yet heard, on behalf of Guyana, an apology to India and to Mrs. Ghosh in particular about this conduct by the person who they were gracious enough to accredit as our representative in India. And then the representative behaves in this most reprehensible way. And we have not yet thought it appropriate to offer an apology to Mrs. Ghosh and to our Indian our Indian counterparts who were gracious enough to say that they accepted this representative of the country. I don't think that's going to go away. And I certainly don't think Ms. Clark's issue is going to go away. It's just that we probably would have divided headlines on the front pages.
And with the Charan Das issue, as you said, we seem not to be concerned about diplomacy. We seem not to be concerned even about deportment and decorum in Delhi or elsewhere. But Charan Das, if I'm not mistaken, was also an attorney, or is also an attorney at law.
Charan Das is an attorney, absolutely. He's an attorney who practiced at the bar for several years. So, like I said, I personally, I mean, if I had any contact with Mrs. Ghosh, I'd like to say that the conduct that you were subject to is not representative of any Guyanese, of certainly any male Guyanese, and certainly definitely not any lawyer in the country. This is just unacceptable. And I think I certainly personally would like to offer an apology. And I think there are several members of the country across the political spectrum that find this reprehensible.
Another, again, sometimes I don't get to ask the questions I want to ask because people call in and tell me some things that bother them. And one person pointed out to me, aren't some of these cases, they were talking about Charan Das in particular, but aren't some of these cases issues of mental health? That some of us are mentally unhinged and we don't realize we're mentally unhinged. And looking at the Charan Das videotape, that may be the problem. I haven't seen a videotape just yet of the police action in Ms. Clark's case, but it could be that people believe that they have almighty powers. You know,
You mean they believe they're omnipotent?
And omnipotent.
In the absence of any evidence to support that Mr. Charan Das had some challenges insofar as mental health, I suppose, what happened there is, why it's an awful reflection? Because that behavior in Guyana almost would pass as acceptable. If your neighbor comes and goes to Mr. Charan Das and says she's looking for his dog, he probably, if he was in Kanji Berbice, would say that to his neighbors. So he just behaved, I believe, in his natural tone. And had that happened in Guyana, I'm not sure what the reaction would be. I just think it's incomprehensible that any male person would suggest that level of abuse to a woman in any context, even if provoked. I mean, I can't. It's incomprehensible. But what is worse is that the fact that it took place a year is one thing, but the fact that up to now we Guyanese have not said to Mrs. Ghosh, we are sorry, we are deeply apologetic about what happens, and this does not reflect Guyana. You know, there are all sorts of other things. I didn't hear the president say that, you know, that we were offering an apology or that or condemning the conduct. Those are matters for Guyana. But what is Guyana's relationship with India? Imagine you are the Indian government. India is what, one of the top 5 economies in the world. It's probably number 1 or number 2 in tech, maybe number 2 or 3 in technology. A country with which we have much to learn from. We've benefited from since the early 70s when Indira Gandhi first visited. How do we treat our friendly nations in this manner where our representative is that disrespectful to a woman in those terms and not yet offer some form of an apology? That I don't get.
And I think, Nigel, we have forgotten that going back to when we were seeking independence very early, since in the 50s, both Dr. Cheddi Jagan and Forbes Burnham made an appeal to India.
Oh, absolutely. I don't think, Enrico, speaking personally, that we as a country can really talk about development without India being a very important partner. I mean, on technology alone, in health, you pick any area, India is a dominant force in the world. And they're not just a dominant force in the emerging world. India is now, were it not for the large population, the large levels of poverty in terms of millions, there would be up as a first world country. So Guyana's development path, I think, is going to be very closely tied to India, irrespective of which government is in office. That's just a sine qua non. It's been there for years, as with China, as with, you know, the United States. I think, Enrico, you will remember back in Mr. Hoyt was still in office, and I think it was somewhere around 1990, the son of the foreign minister got arrested and charged for narcotics, and the minister resigned immediately, even though he had nothing to do with it. He wasn't accused of being anywhere close to it or facilitating it. He resigned immediately. That's the level of conduct that we expected of our foreign ministers in those days. Here we have the actual diplomat behaving in a manner that is less than consistent with your lowest levels of social interaction. And he doesn't resign. He's not asked to resign. The foreign minister doesn't have to explain how this is possible. We don't examine the system that allowed this kind of person to be appointed to a post as important as India. You know, so, you know, like a lot of people say, we are not a real country. We don't aspire to be a real country. And I certainly don't have expectations that we are capable of better in the immediate future.
But we've got to get real. We've got to get real because we are living in a world where everything is recorded. Everything you have to account for, and which brings me back to
who has to account for, Enrico? Forgive me for asking you this. We assume anybody has to account for anything. Where in Guyana in the last you pick. Give me an example where there has ever been a serious call for accountability from a sitting government. You say that we have to account for it. That doesn't happen. You know it doesn't happen. You pick any era in the history of this country and ask me when people have had to account for their conduct. It's always self-imposed.
We've got to start it. We've got to start that process, which brings us to this whole idea of constitutional reform and education. So many times people come and say that they know their rights and so on, and I ask them if they've read the Constitution, if they know what the Constitution. Well, we weren't taught that in school. We don't know anything about that, but we have rights. So shouldn't we begin there, where Guyanese are more educated about issues, so that they can take firm action and ask people to account?
I will agree with the principle that any nation like Guyana that wants to develop itself has to start with education. Absolutely. And that to me is almost a no-brainer. You can have all these millions, but unless you put a substantial amount of that money and dedicate that resource to educating your population, not just about rights and civics, but to improve the level of critical analysis of the population, what comes through our school system, the teachers who are in the school system. Until we do that, we're not going to get any sort of real analysis. Now, as much as we have global friends and more friends as we become wealthier, none of those persons necessarily have our true interest at heart. Because what will happen in Guyana is that, of course, the less critical we are and the less appreciative we are of being able to analyze our services, predict the future, analyze the future, it makes it easier for people to take advantage of us. We have never been a cohesive country. We've never found a national identity. No, we have a competition between one people, one nation, one destiny, and one Guyana. The country has been permanently divided prior to independence and continues to be divided. It has had more acute periods of division than others, but I can't think of, other than very fleeting moments in a cricket stadium, whether at Border or at up at Providence, there is no national identity. What you consider Guyana is not necessarily shared across the board. So when we start to have this discussion about we've got to get real, I don't see it happening. We have a resource that the world wants. We don't have the capacity to even begin to understand the global politics and how we can be played, are being played, and are likely to be played so that people get what they want out of that resource. Now, if we don't even have the ability to analyze, we don't have the data, how are we going to begin to even act in our best interest going forward if we don't even have the facts? So imagine Guyana going to negotiate with Exxon, which the Exxon's budget, I think this year, today, I think in the reports that came out, they have made the largest profit ever in their history. Now, just think about that. Their profit this quarter, my friend, Guyana's budget, if you took it for the last 10 years, doesn't come up to that profit. So think of the resources that you can buy with $30 billion. You can buy the best lawyers, the best negotiators, perhaps the most influential politicians globally. And you're asking some jump up former sugar colony country with less than 1 million people completely split down the middle to begin to have a real discussion about the future and joint partnership. How does that work? Explain to me, how does that work? How does that begin to work? And I think we're in a state of false, how do I put this? False aspirations to believe that we have a country. We don't. We're a couple of people living in the same land, and what we do is hustle. As people in the street would say, we're making a bread. We hustle if we make a bread. And that's the approach of the government, is the approach of everybody trying to make a bread. And sadly, that's where we are. I know it's not the happiest thing, but that's my understanding of where we are now.
Nigel, before you go, we've had this discussion for about half an hour now. Before you go, and I understand your analysis and how you see things, but since I'm speaking to you from part of the diaspora from New York, do you believe that if we were to involve the larger Guyanese population, if we were to look and inventorize what we have out there, out here, from within, because what we seem to be drawing from are those who are left in Guyana, and that pot is becoming smaller. And as a colleague and a former schoolmate of mine kept saying to me, Enrico, we have to develop human capital in Guyana. And we have to teach Guyana how we can grow the pie, not cut up what little we think we have. How could we move forward doing that in light of what happened to Miss Clark over this week, and in light of what happened almost a year ago with regard to Ms. Ghosh?
Permit me two perhaps not corrections but observations. One, you talk about the how do we grow Guyana? You have abandoned Guyana and you are sitting in the diaspora in the middle of this time of so-called plenty. So that statement in and of itself says that you prefer to be somewhere other than Guyana in its time of plenty. That's a statement in and of itself. I'm not criticizing you. I fully understand your position. But if you, Enrico, leading journalist, perhaps the leading journalist in the country, think it's perhaps preferable to be elsewhere than in Guyana, that speaks to itself. Be that as it may. Two, growing the pie, you can't ask for a bigger pie than Guyana has. Guyana just had 2 more discoveries. We're somewhere up at 20 billion barrels if they would tell you officially what the reserves are. So the pie is not the issue here. God has smiled and continues to smile on this country by giving it more resources that it can manage. We got more gold, more rare metals, more forestry. So the pie is not the problem here. And now we discovered oil. There's a war in Ukraine. The price has gone through the roof. Exxon has made its biggest profit ever in its history. So the pie is not the problem. We have a flawed structure. Nobody's interested in changing it. And we assume we have a country. We don't have a country. But to answer your question, wherever our human capital resources are, whether they're in Guyana, combined with New York, Washington, Miami, or wherever they are, Australia, wherever they are, what we want is the benefit of all the combined human capital resources of this country to address in a real sense how we make this a real country and how we go forward so that we can harvest the best we can given the capacities that we have. You continue, I mean, we're the same age, you continue, I think like my wife, because she's still in politics, I can't imagine why, but you continue to believe that we are capable of better. I think we've consistently demonstrated from before independence, we are not capable of better. We've never found a way to make ourselves better. And so I hate to say this, absolutely we need the entire diaspora and all its resources, but the way in which we have approached this problem, it's like a person who keeps doing the same thing day after day and expecting a different result. We got to face facts, Enrico. We got to wake up. We got to smell a little bit more than the coffee. This is, this is not where it is. We've got 1% of the population that will make horrendous amounts of money, and everybody else, not only African people, not only indigenous people, everybody else who is not in that 1% is going to eat grass. If you ask the man in the street now whether they can go into the supermarket or the market and buy more food than they were capable of buying before, they will tell you no. So how is it with $20 billion barrels in reserve minimum, 7 FPSOs coming in the next 10 years, our citizens, less than 1 million people, and they are suffering? That's a basic question. If you can't answer that and you say, well, I gave you $250,000 last week, I'm coming back in 2 weeks more to give you, when you were in government, you fired the sugar workers, or you ain't giving Linden. This is crazy. You can't begin to have a discussion in that context. So I hear what you say, and I admire your persistence in this and your belief that we are capable of better, but I sit on the other side of the fence that says, I don't think we are. So forgive me.
On that note, I remember a teacher used to say that if you live in hope, you may die in despair. Thank you.
You need
very
to find
much.
You need to find that Caribbean island. But I tell my wife we're retiring. We're going to find that Caribbean island. We found it already, where the sun goes down over the Caribbean Sea in the afternoon, and I can hold her hand in a little villa and say, "Darling, I love you." Anything else is pie in the sky.
Thank you so much, Nigel Hughes, for appearing on Capital News International today. And I haven't quite abandoned Guyana. I still make sure that I'm there every time that I can to make a contribution. Thank you, and,
my brother. Thank you.
And best wishes with regard to the way forward with Ms. Clark and what Guyana has to do with regard to Ms. Ghosh on the Charan Das issue. And we'd like to thank you who have joined us on
Thank you.
our Facebook and other social media platforms this evening. And I'd also like to thank Raul De Silva and the technical team here in New York, who are doing a fine job of making sure that we keep you and the rest of the public informed. Good night for now.